She spoke to the quietest man at the party, without knowing he owned the mansion. Sometimes, the smallest gesture changes everything. Sometimes, seeing someone who hides in shadows can rewrite not just one life, but two. This isn't just a story about a billionaire or a humble woman. It's about choosing to stay when the world screams for you to run. It's about finding love, not in perfection, but in presence. Leave pausa, trilha sonora suave ao fundo. If you've ever wondered if real love still exists, stay right here. By the end of this story, you'll believe again. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, and in the comments, tell us, have you ever had a single moment that changed everything? Now take a deep breath, and let's dive into a story you'll carry with you long after the video ends. Star. The mansion stood at the edge of the lake like something out of a dream, lit by 1,000 warm lights, reflecting golden ripples across the water. Kayla never imagined herself inside a place like that. She wasn't part of that world. But her best friend, who worked for the catering service, had begged her to help at the last minute. So there she was, tray in hand, shoes borrowed, nerves braced. She wasn't looking for anything. She just wanted to make it through the night unnoticed. But that changed the moment she saw him. He wasn't like the others. While guests laughed loudly, clinked glasses, and paraded around in designer suits and glittering gowns, he stood quietly near the far end of the room. A man in a tailored dark suit, posture elegant yet withdrawn, eyes scanning the room like he wasn't really there. Kayla noticed him not because he tried to stand out, but because he didn't. And something about his silence pulled her in. Most would have ignored him. His expression was unreadable, his presence almost ghost-like among so much noise. But Kayla, used to reading between lines and silences, saw more. Maybe it was the way his fingers clutched the edge of his glass without drinking it, or how he looked toward the balcony as if longing to disappear. He looked trapped, not by the crowd, but by something deeper. Curious, she took a risk. Balancing her tray, she walked closer and smiled. "You look like someone who'd rather be anywhere else," she said gently. The man turned, surprised, as if no one had spoken to him in hours. His eyes, icy blue with a hint of weariness, met hers. There was a pause. Then the corner of his mouth curved slightly, more acknowledgement than smile. "You're not wrong," he said, voice calm, low, and controlled. Kayla tilted her head, not sure why she wanted to linger. Maybe because he hadn't asked for her name or looked at her uniform like it defined her. "I'm Kayla," she offered, even though he hadn't asked. He looked at her for a long moment, as if deciding whether to answer. "Dylan," he finally said. "Just Dylan. No last name. No title. No trace of arrogance." She nodded, pretending not to notice the stares from nearby guests who wondered why a staff member was chatting with a guest, especially that guest. But Kayla didn't care. She wasn't good at pretending people were better, just because they had more. And besides, something told her Dylan didn't want to be seen as one of them either. "What are you doing at a party if you hate crowds?" she asked with a soft laugh. Dylan glanced away. "Obligation. Must be some important obligation," she teased. "You could say that," he replied with a hint of irony, eyes drifting toward the grand chandelier in that moment. She didn't know who he was. Not really. She didn't know he owned the house, the land, the company that sponsored the event. She didn't know his face was on magazine covers months ago, nor that he had vanished from the public eye after a very public tragedy. To her, he was just a quiet man trying to breathe in a room too loud for healing. That he asked about her tray, about what was on it, and she answered with unexpected honesty. "I'm not really supposed to talk. Just serve," she shrugged. "But you did talk," he said, eyes meeting hers again. "Yeah, I guess I did." There was a long pause. Not uncomfortable, just quiet, as if both understood that silence, when shared, could be more honest than words. Dylan studied her with a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. There was something about her, the simplicity, the directness. She wasn't trying to impress. She wasn't trying to guess who he was. She was just present. "I needed that," he finally said. Kayla blinked. "What?" "Someone seeing me." Without knowing. She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she felt it. Before she could respond, someone called his name sharply from across the room. "Mr. Lancaster, they're asking for you in the East Wing." The voice was polite, but there was pressure in it. Kayla instinctively stepped back, realizing her moment was over. But Dylan surprised her. "I'll be there in a minute," he said, not looking away from her. When the staff member left, he turned to Kayla. "Thank you." "For what?" she asked, confused. "For treating me like a person," he said simply. "Not a role or a brand." She smiled softly, unsure what to say. "Good luck with whatever that is," she offered, nodding toward the other room. Dylan chuckled. "You too, Kayla." And then he disappeared into the mansion. Kayla returned to the kitchen, heart oddly stirred. She didn't even know his last name, but something told her she'd see him again. And next time, maybe he wouldn't be a stranger in the shadows, but a story waiting to unfold. Little did she know, she had just spoken to the owner of the mansion, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Back in the cramped kitchen, Kayla placed the empty tray on the counter, but her mind wasn't in the room. The voices around her, orders shouted. Trays passed, dishes clattering, felt distant. All she could think about were his eyes. That look, as if she had touched something he kept hidden from the world. And she didn't know why it stayed with her, or why her chest felt heavy, like she'd been part of something important without understanding what it was. The other waitresses were whispering about him now. "Did you see him?" one asked. "He never talks to anyone. I heard he's the reclusive heir, some tech empire or something." Kayla listened quietly. She didn't join in, because to her, Dylan wasn't just a headline or a mystery to gossip about. He was the man who had said thank you like he hadn't said it in years. And that meant more than any rumor. Later that night, as she stepped outside and peeled off her name tag, the cool air brushed against her skin like a reset. She glanced back at the glowing windows of the mansion. Somewhere in there, he was probably surrounded by power and wealth. And yet, she had seen something else. Loneliness dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. Maybe they were both out of place. Tonight. Maybe that's why they found each other, if only for a few stolen minutes. What she didn't know was that Dylan was watching from the upstairs window. He saw her walk toward the street, her figure small but steady, her steps light but unafraid. And for the first time in years, he felt a pull towards someone who hadn't asked anything of him. No pitch, no pretense, just presence. He didn't know her story, but he suddenly wanted to. The next morning, Kayla returned to her routine, simple, quiet, and grounded. She worked 2 jobs, helped her neighbor with errands, and took care of her younger brother in the evenings. There was no space in her world for mansions or mysterious men in tailored suits. Still, Dylan's face lingered in her thoughts like a song she couldn't shake. She didn't even know why. It wasn't love. It wasn't fantasy. It was curiosity. Something in him mirrored something in her. At lunchtime, she stopped by the bookstore cafe where she often grabbed coffee before her afternoon shift. The place was cozy and calm, filled with soft jazz and the smell of cinnamon. She ordered her usual and settled by the window, pulling out her notebook. Kayla wrote thoughts, quotes, sketches of people she met. On that page, she wrote just one sentence. He said thank you like it hurt. Then she stared at it for a long while. Across town, Dylan sat in the back of a black SUV, silent as his driver talked about meetings. He wasn't listening. His thoughts were far from numbers and mergers. He kept seeing her face, open, real, unfiltered, in a room filled with people who pretended she hadn't. And that was rare. He hadn't told anyone, but that night had shaken him in a way he hadn't expected. It was supposed to be just another event, another obligation. But then, she spoke, and it stayed. Later that week, Kayla returned to the mansion, this time, not as a server, but as a delivery driver. The catering company was short-staffed, and she had offered to help drop off a custom order for a private brunch. She almost said no, but something in her said yes. Maybe she just wanted to see if he'd be there. Maybe she didn't. Either way, the gate opened for her like it remembered. And so did the house. She carried the boxes through the side entrance, focused on not tripping over herself. The house was quiet this time. No music, no crowd, just distant voices and the occasional echo of footsteps. She placed the trays on the marble counter and turned to leave, only to freeze as she heard a familiar voice behind her. "You again," he said softly. She turned. There he was, Dylan. For a moment, neither of them moved. It felt strange, seeing him in daylight. Without the shadows, without the noise. He looked different, more real, somehow. His sleeves were rolled up, his expression neutral, but his eyes carried that same quiet storm. Kayla offered a small smile. Unsure what to say? "I'm just the delivery girl today," she joked lightly. I see, he said. I didn't expect to see you again. Neither did I. He walked toward the kitchen island, leaning casually against the counter. Do you always end up in places you don't belong? He asked, tone playful. Kayla raised an eyebrow. Who says I don't belong? Dylan nodded, conceding. Fair. There was a pause. She waited for him to go cold or indifferent. But he didn't. Instead, he gestured toward the coffee machine. You want some? She hesitated, then nodded. Why not? They sat across from each other, the silence now filled with something different, comfort. You live around here? He asked. Just outside of town. Been here most of my life. And you deliver food, write in cafes, and talk to strange men at parties? Kayla laughed. Only the ones hiding in corners. His lips curved, into a real smile this time. I guess I owe you another thank you then. She looked at him carefully. Why do I feel like people don't talk to you like this often? Because they don't, he admitted. They talk at me, not with me. That sounds lonely. It is. Kayla didn't reply with pity, just presence. You could change that, you know, she said. Could I? The moment stretched. Two people from different worlds sitting in the same kitchen, sharing the same air, the same stillness. Kayla reached for her keys. I should go before I get fired, she said with a smile. Dylan stood. Wait. She looked at him, curious. Would you want to come back sometime? Not to work, just to talk. She blinked, caught off guard. Why? Because talking to you feels like breathing fresh air, he said quietly. Kayla hesitated. She wasn't used to invitations like this, or men like him. Okay, she said, but only if there's coffee. He smiled again. It's a deal. She turned to leave, heart pounding in her chest. He watched her go, not knowing what he'd just begun. Outside, Kayla stood on the steps, sunlight on her face. She hadn't planned on returning to the mansion, but now the thought didn't scare her. Because she wasn't walking into a palace. She was walking towards something real, something unexpected, and maybe something that could change everything. Asterisk back. In her small apartment, Kayla placed her keys on the counter and sat on the edge of the couch, still processing everything. She hadn't expected the invitation, or the way his eyes softened when he asked. There was something fragile in his voice, as if he wasn't used to asking for company without expecting to be turned down. And she had said yes, not because he was rich or handsome, but because something about him felt unfinished. And she wanted to understand why. Her brother, Mason, peeked out from his room. You're home early, he said, rubbing his eyes. Kayla smiled and nodded. Just had a quick delivery. To that fancy place again? She hesitated. Yeah. Did you see him? Kayla paused. I might have. Mason smirked. And she threw a cushion at him, laughing. And nothing. Just someone who offered me coffee. But deep down, she knew it wasn't nothing. Dylan wasn't just a client or a passing stranger anymore. He had remembered her, invited her, and beneath all that polish and power, he seemed lost. Just like people she knew. Just like parts of herself. Meanwhile, Dylan stood in his office, overlooking the lake, coffee still warm in his hand, but untouched. He wasn't used to feeling uncertain. His life was built on plans, control, expectations. But nothing about Kayla fit those rules. She had looked at him like he was just a man, not a company, not a name, not a scandal. And somehow, that disarmed him more than any hostile boardroom ever had. He remembered the way she smiled, the way she listened without interrupting. He hadn't felt that scene in years, not since before the headlines, before the betrayal that rewired the way he trusted the world. Kayla didn't flinch when he was quiet. She didn't push him to perform. She didn't want anything from him. And that was new, refreshing, dangerous, in a way he didn't know how to handle. The next morning, she found a note at the cafe where she always sat. It was scribbled on a plain napkin, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Coffee's on me next time. I'll be in the garden. D. Her heart skipped a beat. He didn't leave a number, didn't ask for anything, just left a door open. Kayla folded the napkin and placed it in her notebook. She didn't know what this was. Friendship? Curiosity? Something neither of them could name, but she felt it growing, like roots beneath the surface. And for the first time in a long time, she looked forward to what the next day might bring. Not because of the mansion, but because of the man hiding inside it. The garden was tucked behind the mansion like a secret, hidden from guests, reporters, and noise. It wasn't manicured like the front lawns. It felt wild, real, untouched by perfection. Ivy climbed the stone walls, and wind chimes swayed gently. From an old oak, Kayla followed the cobblestone path with careful steps, unsure what she'd find. She had almost talked herself out of coming, but something stronger than fear had led her back. Dylan was there, sitting on a wooden bench, sleeves rolled up, fingers tangled with a book he wasn't reading. When he looked up and saw her, something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, not relief, just quiet welcome. "You found the note," he said. "I did. It was either that or send a carrier pigeon." Kayla laughed. "You don't seem like the type to chase people down." "I'm not," he said honestly, "but I didn't want to miss the chance." They sat for a while without speaking, letting the breeze fill the silence. Birds fluttered nearby, and a gardener moved quietly in the distance. "This place doesn't feel like the rest of the house," Kayla observed. "That's why I come here," Dylan replied. "It doesn't ask anything of me." She glanced at him. "You say that like people always do." "They do," he said simply, usually without realizing it. Kayla nodded. She knew the feeling, just from the other side of the glass. She didn't ask about his past. She didn't need to. Instead, she spoke of hers. Growing up with a sick mom, raising her brother, working since she was 15. Her voice didn't carry bitterness, only truth. And Dylan listened like no one had ever told him anything real before. "I'm not ashamed of where I came from," she said, "but I'm tired of being looked at like I should be." Dylan blinked, absorbing the words. "I don't look at you like that," he murmured. "I know," she replied. "That's why I came." There was something raw in his gaze now, like a window cracked open after a storm. "My mother used to sit here," he said softly. Kayla turned to him. "She died 2 years ago. Cancer. No one really knew. She kept it quiet. Said the world had taken enough of her already." "I'm sorry," Kayla whispered. "She was the only person who knew me before all this," he said, gesturing vaguely to the house, the wealth, the weight of it all. "She saw you," Kayla said. "And then she was gone," he added. And the silence became unbearable. He paused. That's when the mask started. The public one. The polished one. The safe one. "And now?" Kayla asked. Dylan looked at her. "Now? I think I'm tired of hiding." She smiled. "Good. Because I don't talk to masks." He chuckled, the sound soft and unfamiliar in his own ears. "I'm starting to believe that." They spent the afternoon talking like old friends who had just met. She told him how her dream was to open a community space for kids who had nowhere to go. He listened without interrupting, without offering money or solutions. Just presence. She asked about his company, but he brushed it off. "I don't want to be that guy today," he said. "I just want to be Dylan." "Then Dylan you are," she replied, sipping her coffee. And for the first time, he believed he could be as the sky turned golden. Kayla stood to leave. Dylan walked her to the edge of the garden, hands in his pockets. "Can I see you again?" he asked, almost hesitant. She tilted her head. "Aren't you supposed to be too busy for that?" He smiled. "I can make time." She paused, then nodded. "Okay, just no carrier pigeons this time." "Deal," he said. That night, Dylan sat in his study and stared at the fireplace, no fire burning. He felt like something old inside him had cracked, just a little. Not in a way that hurt, but in a way that let light in. He didn't know what this connection with Kayla meant, but he knew he hadn't felt this human in years. And for once, that didn't scare him. It made him want more. Kayla, meanwhile, sat on her porch steps under the stars, notebook on her lap. She didn't write this time. She just closed her eyes and let the stillness wash over her. Something was unfolding, slowly, softly. And though she didn't dare call it love, she knew it was something real, something worth protecting. Because sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that stay the longest. And this one was just beginning. The next few days unfolded like pages neither of them had planned to write. Dylan began showing up in places he never used to, quiet. Cafes, small bookshops, the park near the community center where Kayla sometimes volunteered. He didn't wear suits. He didn't bring bodyguards. He brought questions, curiosity, time. And Kayla, though cautious, found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone in years. They talked about everything. Childhood dreams, books. They never finished. Things that made them angry and things that made them feel alive. Sometimes they walked in silence, just letting the breeze carry what words couldn't say. Dylan had built a world of steel and glass around him. But every time he looked at Kayla, that world softened, bent, let a little warmth in. And it scared him, but not enough to walk away. Kayla, on the other hand, was fighting her own battle. Her heart was a compass that had learned to avoid illusions. She had seen too many people get hurt trusting masks. But Dylan wasn't a mask anymore. At least, not with her. She saw his shadows, and he didn't hide them. Still, part of her whispered, "This man doesn't belong to your world. Be careful." But another part, the louder part, whispered, "Maybe he's trying to point." One afternoon, he asked to visit the community center where she helped tutor kids after school. She hesitated, unsure if it was a good idea. "It's not fancy," she warned. "It's real," he replied. And so, she let him in. Dylan walked through the halls of chipped paint and laughter and crayons on the wall, and for once, no one cared who he was. The kids tugged his sleeves, asked questions, drew pictures of him with funny hair. Kayla watched from a distance as he sat cross-legged on the floor, helping a boy with math. And in that moment, she saw him not as a billionaire, but as a man trying to remember who he was before the world told him who he should be. That night, Dylan didn't say much. But when he dropped her off, he looked at her with something raw in his expression. "Thank you for letting me be part of that." He said that IT was simple, but it meant more than he could explain. The next morning, headlines appeared. A blurry photo of Dylan at the center, surrounded by children, with Kayla in the background. Reclusive tech mogul seen at local nonprofit with mystery woman. The story was filled with speculation, assumptions, and veiled judgment. Kayla's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Her coworkers whispered. The center's director looked worried. And Kayla? She felt her stomach sink. She wasn't ashamed of being seen with him, but she hated being seen like that, reduced to a mystery, a curiosity, a question mark next to a man too big for her world. Dylan called that afternoon. She almost didn't answer, but when she did, his voice was steady. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't think they'd find us there." "I know you didn't," she replied softly. "But they did," she added. And silence filled the line. "This is why I stay hidden," Dylan finally said. "I get it," Kayla replied. "But I don't live in a world where I can hide." He sighed. "I don't want to bring chaos into your life." "You didn't," she said. "The world did." There was a pause. "But I can choose how I respond," she added. And in that moment, Dylan knew this woman wasn't afraid of truth. Kayla ended the call gently, then turned off her phone. She stepped outside, walked to the community garden, and sat beneath the same tree where she used to read to her brother. She closed her eyes and breathed. Yes, the world was watching. Yes, things had changed. But her heart still beat the same. And Dylan? He had let her in. That mattered more than the noise. The fallout from the article spread faster than either of them could contain. Blogs speculated. Social media stirred with curiosity. And soon, Kayla's name was out, spelled wrong on half the sites, but there nonetheless. She wasn't angry, just exposed. People began showing up at the community center asking questions. Her boss asked if she wanted time off. She said no, because hiding wasn't her nature. But that didn't mean she wasn't shaken. Dylan felt it too. The tightening of the world around him. The spotlight he had tried so hard to avoid turned once, again in his direction. Only this time, it lit up something he wasn't ready to explain. Because the truth was, Dylan had secrets. Not just about his fortune or his family, but about the fall, the betrayal, the reason he left the boardroom and disappeared from headlines. For 2 long, painful years, he paced in his study, wondering how much to tell her, how much she deserved to know, and whether honesty would bring them closer or break the fragile trust they'd built. Every time he picked up his phone to call her, he stopped. What if she saw him differently? What if she walked away? But deep down, Dylan knew real connection demands truth, and he had run from it for too long. Meanwhile, Kayla kept her life as normal as possible. She still helped with homework at the center, still made dinner for Mason, still drank her coffee by the window each morning. But she felt different now, like the world had rearranged her without asking. And in the silence, a question echoed. Who exactly is Dylan Lancaster, and what is he hiding? She didn't need wealth, but she did need honesty. When he finally called, his voice was quieter than usual. "Can we meet?" "Where?" she asked. "Somewhere that isn't mine. Somewhere you feel safe." She thought for a moment. "There's an old train station on the edge of town. No one goes there anymore." "I'll be there in an hour," he replied. The sky was soft gray when they met. The abandoned platform still held traces of its past, faded benches, rusted signs, and echoes of old arrivals. Dylan waited near a lamppost, coat draped over his arm, hands buried in his pockets. When Kayla approached, he turned, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. No smiles, no small talk, just presence. "I owe you the truth," he began. She nodded slowly. "I didn't just disappear from the business world because I was tired," he said. "I was betrayed by my fiancé and by my best friend. They worked together to push me out of my own company, used my mother's illness as distraction, sold pieces of it while I was by her side." Kayla blinked, absorbing the weight of the words. "I walked away, not because I gave up, but because I didn't want to become like them." He looked at her, searching for a reaction. "People called me arrogant, weak. The headlines twisted everything. And now?" Kayla asked. "Now, I'm building something new. Quietly, carefully. But more than that," he paused. "I'm trying to be someone who deserves a second chance. At business, at life, at connection." Kayla stepped closer, her eyes steady. "You think I care about your money or your empire?" "No," he said. "That's what scares me." The wind picked up, tugging at her hair. "I don't need a perfect man, Dylan," she said softly. "I just need a real one." He swallowed hard. "Then, here I am. Real, flawed, trying." She smiled, a sadness behind her eyes. "I believe you, but I need time. The world's watching now, and I need to know you won't vanish when it gets loud." "I won't," he said. "Not from you." They sat on the bench for a while, not saying much. Kayla leaned back, letting the silence speak. She didn't fully trust him yet, but she saw something in his eyes, a hunger for truth, not applause. And that mattered. Before they left, he handed her a folded envelope. "Something I want you to read. When you're ready." She tucked it into her coat without opening it. That night, Kayla sat by the window, envelope in hand, tea cooling beside her. She unfolded the pages, Dylan's handwriting, raw and uneven. It wasn't a love letter. It was a confession. About loss. About shame. About how his mother's last words were, "Don't become what hurt you." And how for a while he had. But now, he wanted to rewrite that story, with honesty, presence, and choice. With her, she didn't cry, but she felt her chest tighten, because she knew what it meant for someone like him to admit weakness, to lower the walls without asking for anything back. And slowly, she began to believe that maybe love isn't built on perfection, but on two people choosing to stay, even when the story gets messy. Asterisk the next morning, Kayla folded the letter and placed it inside her notebook, close to the page, where she had once written, "He said thank you like it hurt." Now she understood why. Every word he had written carried the weight of someone who had learned to protect himself by pushing the world away. But something in her refused to let that be the end of the story. She had seen glimpses of the man he was behind the silence. And that man was worth fighting for. When Dylan arrived at the cafe later that day, he didn't know if she'd be there. He didn't expect forgiveness. But when he saw her sitting by the window, his breath caught. Not because she looked different, but because she hadn't left. She looked up from her cup, met his eyes, and smiled. Small, quiet, but real. It was the kind of smile that said, "I read your truth. And I stayed." And for Dylan, that meant everything. He joined her without a word, sliding into the seat across from hers. For a few moments, they didn't speak. They just shared the warmth of being seen. "I don't have all the answers," he said finally. "Good," she replied. "I didn't come here for answers." "What did you come for?" "To see if you'd show up," she said simply. Dylan leaned back, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You scare me, Kayla," he admitted. She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because you make me want to be better. Not for image, not for legacy, just for me." "That's not something to fear," she said gently. "That's something to follow." And then, quietly, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Not a promise, but a beginning. Later that evening, Dylan brought her to a place no one else had been since his mother passed, a small greenhouse behind the mansion, once filled with her favorite flowers. It was dusty, forgotten, but still alive. "She used to sit here and say that love grows in quiet places," he said. Kayla walked through the rows of overgrown stems, brushing her fingers along the glass. "It smells like memory," she whispered. Dylan smiled. "She would have liked you. She sounds like the kind of woman I wish I'd known." As they stood beneath the cracked skylight, moonlight filtering through broken panes, Dylan turned to her with a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I don't know where this is going," he said, "but I know I want to walk it with you." Kayla looked up at him, her voice calm and steady. "Then don't walk ahead of me. Don't walk behind me. Just stay beside me." And in that silent glass room, something bloomed between them. Not yet love, not yet certainty, but something that could one day become both. Still, as they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, neither of them saw the flash of a camera from beyond the trees, nor the car parked quietly on the far edge of the property. Someone was watching, and the peace they were building was about to be tested. Because when hearts begin to heal, the past often returns louder than before. The headline dropped like a stone into still water. Billionaire's secret romance. Dylan Lancaster spotted with local woman linked to community funding scandal. The article twisted facts into fiction, dragged Kayla's name through manufactured suspicion, and painted Dylan as either reckless or manipulative. Photos taken without consent, quotes taken out of context. In less than 24 hours, everything they were building stood on fragile ground. Kayla found out while walking into the community center. The receptionist met her with pity. The director pulled her aside, face pale. "We've had donors pull out," she said softly. "They're afraid of association." "With me?" Kayla asked, heart racing. "With him," the woman said. "But you're in the photos." Kayla clenched her jaw. "We've done nothing wrong. Doesn't matter. In their world, perception is truth." Dylan was in a meeting when the news broke. His phone buzzed nonstop. His PR team called him in a panic. He barely heard them. All he could think about was Kayla, about how something that had felt so private now belonged to the world. And not kindly, not gently. It was cruel, invasive, and brutal. And worst of all, he had dragged her into it without meaning to, without protecting her. She didn't answer his calls at first, not out of anger, but shock. She walked for hours, letting the wind clear her thoughts. People stared. A few strangers whispered. But what hurt most was the look in Mason's eyes when he asked, "Are they going to shut down the center because of you?" She knelt in front of him, holding his hands. "No, baby. They can't shut down what's built on truth." That night, she finally called Dylan. He answered on the first ring. "I'm so sorry," he said before she could speak. "I know," she replied. "I should have seen this coming." Kayla paused. "But you didn't, because you hoped the world would mind its business." He exhaled, defeated. "And it never does." "I can't fix this overnight," he added. "I'm not asking you to," she said. "But I need space." Dylan's voice faltered. "Are you leaving?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I need to remember who I was before all this. Before the cameras. Before the whispers. I need to stand on my own feet before I stand beside you." He was silent. Then he whispered, "I understand." And the line went quiet. The days that followed moved slowly. Dylan stayed out of the press. Kayla stayed out of his world. But they didn't stop thinking about each other. Every time she passed the train station, her heart tugged. Every time he crossed the garden, he looked at the bench and remembered her hand in his. They were apart, but not gone. In a surprising move, Dylan held a press conference. Not to defend himself, but to tell the truth. He spoke of his past, of the betrayal, of his absence. He named no names, pointed no fingers. But when asked about Kayla, he looked into the cameras and said, "She is the most honest person I've ever known, and I will not let her be punished for my name." The video went viral, not because it was polished, but because it was raw. People saw the cracks, the effort, the man trying to make amends. The same donors who had pulled out now asked to meet with Kayla. The center received anonymous gifts, silent support, and slowly, the fire began to die. But one thing remained. Would she forgive him for not shielding her sooner? One afternoon, Kayla returned to the greenhouse. He wasn't expecting her. She found him watering wilted roses. "I heard what you said," she whispered from the doorway. Dylan turned slowly, unsure if she had come to stay or say goodbye. She walked in, steady steps, eyes full of truth. "You didn't protect me," she said softly, "but you chose to face it." "I was scared I'd lose you," he confessed. She nodded. "And I was scared I'd lose myself." They stood there, inches apart, history hanging between them. Kayla reached for his hand. "Next time," she said, "we walk into the fire together." Dylan's voice broke. "You're still here." She smiled. I was never far. They didn't kiss. Not yet. They simply stood in the silence, fingers entwined, heartbeats steady. Because real love doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes, it comes with standing still when everything tries to shake you. And in that moment, Dylan knew she wasn't just someone he cared about. She was the reason he wanted to become a better man. Asterisk that evening, Dylan didn't ask her to stay. And Kayla didn't promise she would. They simply sat in the garden until the sky turned violet and the wind fell quiet. It wasn't about fixing anything. It was about learning a new rhythm, one built not on urgency, but on presence. Dylan served her tea the way she liked it. 2 sugars, no questions. She wrapped her coat around her body and simply breathed. For the first time in days, she felt whole again. Inside the greenhouse, Kayla found an old notebook tucked under a flower pot. It had belonged to Dylan's mother. Pages filled with flower sketches and phrases about silent love. The best things grow when no one is watching, one line read. Kayla smiled and showed it to him. She used to say that when I was little. Dylan said quietly, I never understood until now. Kayla closed the notebook gently, like someone closing something sacred. She still speaks, she said. Through you. The next morning, Dylan showed up at the community center. No security, no announcement. The children ran to him like he was one of them. This time, Kayla didn't try to stop him. She simply watched as he knelt on the floor and helped a little girl with a puzzle. He wasn't there as a CEO, or an heir, or a headline. He was there as a man who had learned how to listen. And to Kayla, that was worth more than any fortune. After class, she led him to the kitchen in the back. I want to show you something, she said. It was a mural of drawings made by the kids. In the center, there was a portrait of him. Messy hair, crooked smile, kind eyes. They see you as someone who stayed. Someone who listened. Dylan stared at it, moved. That's all I ever wanted to be. That night, he invited her to dinner. Not at a fancy restaurant, but in the garden, with candles and mason jars and food he cooked himself. Kayla arrived in jeans and a sweatshirt, her hair tied up in a quick bun. And when he saw her, he said, You're more beautiful than anything this place has ever had. She laughed shyly. You've never had a garden before? He smiled. I've never had someone to plant it with. And there, in the middle of a reborn garden, they began to sow what would one day bloom. Nothing was rushed. Dylan didn't try to win her with gifts. Kayla didn't try to impress him with certainty. They simply existed. Together. With each cup of coffee, each conversation, each shared silence, they were rewriting the meaning of the word home. And when the world tried to return with noise, headlines, and flashes, Dylan chose the opposite. He turned it all off and listened only to her voice reading to the children. Kayla learned she didn't have to fight everything alone anymore. Now, she had someone beside her, not to rescue her, but to sit beside her while she chose her own way forward. And so, without grand promises, they began to build a love that would last far beyond the season. It started with a touch. Not dramatic, not planned. Just Dylan brushing a strand of hair from Kayla's face one afternoon as they laughed over burned cookies in his kitchen. The gesture was small, but it made her freeze because it wasn't just affection. It was care, reverence, presence. And for someone who had always been strong for others, being seen like that felt like stepping into unfamiliar warmth she wasn't sure how to hold, Dylan noticed. He didn't rush. He simply stepped back, offering her space with his silence. You're allowed to feel safe, he said quietly. Kayla looked at him, heart beating faster than she liked to admit. I don't know how, she confessed. Then, we'll figure it out together, he replied. And in that moment, she realized he wasn't trying to fix her. He just wanted to walk beside her, no matter how long it took. Over the next few weeks, Dylan began sharing more pieces of himself. Old journals, songs his mother used to hum, stories he had never told another soul. He brought her into the parts of the mansion no one else had entered in years, not to impress her, but to show her who he really was when no one was watching. In return, Kayla let him see her past, scrapbooks from her childhood, drawings Mason had made, even the letters she once wrote to her mom before she passed. I thought if I said the words out loud, it would hurt less, she whispered. Dylan held her hand and said, I'll carry the silence with you. They began creating rituals. Tuesday dinners in the greenhouse. Friday walks through the farmers market. Sunday mornings with coffee and a single shared newspaper. And always, quiet moments where their eyes spoke what their mouths hadn't yet dared to. They didn't say, "I love you." Not yet. But it was there, in the space between their steps. One rainy night, the power went out. Dylan lit candles while Kayla made tea. They sat near the window, listening to the storm. "I used to be afraid of thunder," he said softly. "What changed?" she asked. He looked at her. You taught me to stop running from the noise." Kayla rested her head on his shoulder, then let it pour. Still, the past hadn't fully let go. One afternoon, Dylan's assistant arrived with an envelope marked urgent. Inside was a letter from his former business partner, the one who betrayed him. An offer, a proposal to reunite and restore what was lost. Dylan stared at it in silence. Power, redemption, revenge, all within reach. But all he could think about was Kayla. He showed her the letter, unsure of what to say. Kayla read it carefully, then looked up. "What do you want?" she asked, not judging, just asking. Dylan swallowed. For the first time, "I'm not sure." She took his hand. "Then don't answer yet. Not until you remember who you are without all of it." And he nodded, knowing that was exactly what he needed to hear. Days later, they visited Kayla's childhood neighborhood. Dylan wore jeans and a simple jacket. No entourage, no ego. They walked through old streets, past faded buildings, and stopped in front of her elementary school. "I used to sit right there," she said, pointing to the steps. "Wrote my first story on that bench." He smiled. "I want to read everything you've ever written." She laughed. "That's dangerous." "Then I'm ready for the risk," he said. That night, she gave him a worn-out notebook, her first full story. He read it cover to cover, and when he looked up, his eyes shimmered. "You've been carrying worlds," he said. "So have you," she replied. He reached for her hand, and this time, neither of them let go. The next morning, Kayla stood in the greenhouse as sunlight poured through the glass. Dylan entered with something behind his back, a small plaque, handcrafted, simple. It read, "Home, where two stories become one." He hung it on the wall without a word. She turned to him, speechless. And then, finally, the words came. "I love you, Kayla." She didn't hesitate. "I love you too, Dylan." It wasn't a declaration. It was a recognition of everything they had survived, of everything they had chosen. And when they kissed, slow, certain, sacred, it wasn't the beginning. It was the continuation of something already rooted in truth, in stillness, in choosing each other again and again. They didn't promise forever with words. They proved it with presence. And that was more than enough. The following days felt different, not lighter, but steadier. Now that the words had been spoken, Kayla noticed the way Dylan looked at her more softly, like he finally had permission to feel everything he had been holding back. And she, in turn, allowed herself to lean into the comfort of his presence without guilt. Love didn't erase the past or fix every fear, but it gave both of them a place to land after the storms. One evening, Dylan brought her to his mother's old study. Dust still lingered on the bookshelves, but her scent, lavender and worn paper, remained. This was her favorite room, he said, his voice full of memory. Kayla ran her fingers over a collection of letters tied with silk ribbon. "Have you read these?" He shook his head. "Not yet. I was waiting to be ready." "Maybe we read them together," she offered. As they sat cross-legged on the floor, unfolding one envelope at a time, Dylan began to understand where his mother's strength had come from. Quiet conviction, small joys, fierce love. Kayla read aloud a line that made them both pause. "When the world tries to make you forget who you are, remember who loved you into becoming." Dylan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. "She loved you that way," Kayla said softly. "And now I love you that way too." And Dylan, without words, leaned his forehead against hers in silent gratitude. Later that night, Kayla stayed at the mansion for the first time. They didn't rush into anything. She curled up beside him on the sofa, both of them fully clothed, wrapped in one blanket. A storm tapped at the windows, but neither of them flinched. They talked about small things, favorite childhood snacks, songs they still remembered. And when she finally fell asleep against his chest, Dylan didn't move. He just held her as if anchoring his entire world. The next morning, she made pancakes while he brewed coffee. It was domestic, quiet, and oddly perfect. They danced barefoot in the kitchen to a song playing faintly on the radio. No cameras, no pressure, just two people choosing each other in the smallest of ways. Kayla burned one pancake and laughed. So hard she cried. Dylan kissed her forehead and said, "This is my favorite kind of chaos." And she replied, "Get used to it. I come with extra syrup and unpredictable timing." They began to make plans, simple ones. A reading corner at the center, a new shelf in the greenhouse, an afternoon trip to visit her old neighbor. Nothing extravagant, just moments that stitched their lives together like patchwork. Still, both knew life wouldn't always stay this peaceful. But now they had a rhythm. And more importantly, they had each other. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky shift from gold to navy, Dylan took her hand and said, "I used to think love had to be grand, loud, dazzling." Kayla looked at him, her fingers curling into his. "And now," she asked, "now I know the truest love is the one that stays," he said. "The one that listens and waits and chooses presence over perfection." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And the one that shares pancakes without judgment," she added, smiling. The letter came in a white envelope, formal and cold. Dylan found it on the doorstep early one morning. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a legal notice. His former business partner had filed a civil lawsuit against him for breach of contract, claiming Dylan's recent public statements caused reputational damage. It was the retaliation he had been waiting for, not just to hurt his image, but to drag him back into the world he had walked away from. That he sat in silence, reading the letter again and again, his coffee untouched. The weight of it wasn't in the lawsuit itself. He had lawyers, resources. The weight was in what it would do to Kayla, to the center, to everything they had just begun to build. He didn't want the cameras back. He didn't want the noise to touch her again. When Kayla arrived later that morning, she found him standing in the garden, unmoving. "Something happened," she said, sensing it instantly. He handed her the letter without a word. She read it slowly, her face tightening. And when she looked up, she saw it, the old fear in his eyes. The man who had been betrayed. The boy who had learned that trusting came with consequences. "Do you want to fight it?" she asked gently. "I don't know," he said. "Part of me wants to burn it all down. And the other part wants to run," he admitted. Kayla nodded. "What if you stayed still instead?" He looked at her. "What does that even mean?" "It means don't let him control who you become again." Over the next few days, the media buzz returned. Reporters camped near the gates. Blogs speculated whether Kayla had influenced Dylan's decisions. Some even questioned her role at the community center. The board of directors scheduled an emergency meeting, and for the first time since they had fallen in love, Kayla felt something heavy settle in her chest. What if love isn't enough to protect us from the world? Mason noticed. He saw her lose sleep. He saw the way she turned off her phone and stared at the walls. "You can leave if it's too much," Dylan told her one night. But Kayla's answer was steady. "I'm not leaving. I just need time to remember why I stayed." And Dylan, heart in hand, whispered, "Because you saw the man behind the fire." At the community center meeting, Kayla stood tall. She answered questions, corrected headlines, and reminded them of the truth. "We don't teach kids to run. When things get hard," she said, "we teach them to stay rooted, to grow, even in storms." Some board members shifted uncomfortably, but others nodded. And slowly, the tide began to turn. Meanwhile, Dylan made a decision, not out of revenge, but clarity. He filed a countersuit not for money, but to demand accountability. He agreed to a live interview to tell the full story on his terms. Kayla sat beside him during the taping, holding his hand under the table. And when the interviewer asked why now, Dylan answered, "Because I won't let fear dictate who I am anymore." The interview aired that evening. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. It was raw, honest. He named names, took responsibility, clarified truth. But the moment that made headlines was when he turned to Kayla and said, "She's not my weakness. She's my compass." And the internet, for once, listened. Messages poured in. From strangers, from old friends, from people who had lost love and found it again, from people who believed in second chances. Donors returned to the center. Volunteers signed up in droves. The lawsuit lingered, but its power weakened. Because the truth had found its voice. That weekend, Dylan and Kayla went to the greenhouse. They cleaned the windows, replanted herbs, hung wind chimes that whispered in the breeze. And in the middle of the afternoon, she looked at him and said, "I would choose this again, even with the storm." He pulled her into his arms. "And I would still build this garden, even knowing it would rain." Because love that survives pressure doesn't just grow stronger, it grows deeper, wiser, quieter in its certainty. And that's what they had now. Not a love untouched by conflict, but a love that chose to stay, no matter the weather. Asterisk in the weeks that followed, calm slowly returned. This time, not as silence, but as choice. Dylan and Kayla learned to live with the noise in the background, without letting it take over. They planted on Sundays, read old letters on Mondays, and spent Saturdays at the community center together, part of a routine that didn't demand perfection, only presence. And with every gesture repeated, every glance exchanged, they affirmed, "We are here, again, on purpose." Asterisk one evening, Mason handed Kayla a small envelope. "I made this at school," he said. Inside, there was a drawing, 3 stick figures in a garden, holding hands. One wore a dress, one had glasses, one had a messy tie, and at the top, in shaky handwriting, "My family." Kayla's eyes filled with tears. Dylan, upon seeing the drawing, just whispered, "I've never been part of one before." Kayla held the paper to her chest and smiled. "You are now," she said. They didn't need to say anything else. Because some truths live deeper than declarations. Some bonds form not by blood, but by the brave act of staying. And Dylan, who once had everything but felt alone, now had the one thing money could never buy: belonging. The next day, Dylan surprised her with an empty room in the mansion. Sunlight poured through tall windows, and fresh paint still lingered in the air. "I thought you might want a space to write," he said, a little shy. On the desk sat her notebook, placed carefully beside a vase of lavender. Kayla ran her fingers over the wood, speechless. "It's yours," Dylan said. "A room for your voice." She turned and kissed him, not out of romance, but out of reverence. That night, they danced in the kitchen again, barefoot, music low. No event, no reason, just rhythm and heart. Mason joined them halfway through, twirling between their legs, laughing until he fell onto a pillow. And in that chaos, Dylan looked at Kayla and whispered, This is everything." She nodded, resting her head against his. "This is home." Still, deep in both of them, something stirred, an unspoken knowing. They had come far, but some stories ask for a mark, a moment, not to prove love exists, but to celebrate that it survived. And as Dylan traced circles on Kayla's back one quiet morning, he looked at her with wonder and asked, "Would you stay, always, if I asked?" Kayla didn't rush. She looked out the window at the garden they had planted, then back at the man who had once lived behind walls. And slowly, with a softness that only truth allows, she said, "I've already stayed. But if you ask, I'll say yes again." And in that shared breath, the promise of forever began to take root. Asterisk. The sun rose slowly that morning, casting golden light over the greenhouse like a blessing. Kayla stood by the doorway, barefoot, arms crossed gently over her chest, watching Dylan place the last stone along the garden path. It was just a small detail, but for them, it was a symbol. Every piece of that place had been touched by intention, by effort, by choice. They hadn't rushed anything. They had let time shape what they'd built. That day marked 1 year since they had first spoken. 1 year since she noticed the quietest man at the party. 1 year since a single conversation cracked open something neither of them saw coming. And now, they weren't just in love, they were rooted. Not in fantasy, but in the soil of shared silence, forgiveness, and truth. Dylan had stopped asking if he was enough. Kayla had stopped proving she was strong. They simply were. In the center of the garden stood a wooden arch wrapped in vines and wildflowers. It wasn't grand, but it was beautiful, handmade by the children from the community center. There were no rows of chairs, no media, no formal invitations. Just a few close friends, a warm breeze, and the steady heartbeat of something real. Mason stood proudly beside Kayla, holding a small bouquet of lavender. Dylan waited under the arch, heart steady, eyes only on her. She wore a simple white dress, bare shoulders kissed by sunlight. No veil, no makeup, just Kayla, free, glowing, exactly herself. And as she stepped down the path, Dylan felt the world still. not because of the ceremony, but because she had chosen to walk toward him again, not out of obligation, but because love, when real, always moves forward. When they faced each other, Dylan didn't read vows from paper. He looked into her eyes and spoke from the years he thought he'd lost. "You didn't rescue me," he said. "You reminded me I could come back to myself." "You didn't fix me," Kayla replied. "You stayed while I learned to breathe." Then, without a pause, she added softly, "And now, I choose you. Not just today, but in every quiet moment that follows." And he whispered, "I choose you too." There were no rings. Instead, they planted a fig tree together, its roots deep, soil rich. A symbol not of promises, but of process, of growth that would take seasons, of branches that would stretch, bend, and one day offer shade. The guests stood in stillness, some wiping tears. Mason clapped the loudest, and above them, wind chimes sang with joy. Later, as the sun dipped behind the hills, they sat on the porch of the mansion, now truly their home. 2 mugs of tea between them, a blanket over their legs, and the fig tree visible in the distance. Kayla leaned her head on Dylan's shoulder and sighed. "Funny how everything that broke us brought us here." Dylan nodded. Sometimes forever doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, through presence, through choosing to stay. She smiled. And through pancakes. That night, the greenhouse glowed with candlelight. They danced alone, no music but the soft hum of night. And when Kayla rested her hand on Dylan's heart, she felt its rhythm steady and certain. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, slow, sure, and full of everything they had walked through. There was no doubt left in either of them, no fear, only the quiet certainty of having arrived. In the weeks that followed, they didn't talk much about the wedding. They just lived it, each day becoming the ceremony. Dylan kept writing letters he never sent, placing them in a drawer labeled "For Us." Kayla filled her new studio with stories inspired by real things. A boy who learned to love again, a woman who taught with silence. And in the corner of every page, a tiny drawing of a fig tree. A reminder of what was planted when words weren't enough. The community center blossomed too, not because of donations, but because people felt seen. Dylan visited often, not as a guest, but as family. Mason began calling him "my favorite chaos." Kayla called him partner. He called her everything. And the world, finally, grew quiet. Enough to let them simply be. Years passed. The garden grew. The fig tree bore its first fruit one quiet autumn morning. They shared it beneath the tree, smiling like children. It tasted like permanence, like everything they had fought to protect. Kayla whispered, This is what staying tastes like." And Dylan nodded. "I never want anything else." They never chased perfection. They let the hard days come. They let joy be small and deep. They taught Mason that love isn't always loud, but it always shows up. And that home isn't a place. It's a decision you make every day with the right person. One evening, as the sky turned a soft blue-gray, Dylan found another letter in Kayla's notebook. It read, "You once said you didn't believe in forever, but look at us now. Still here, still rooted, still saying yes, even after the storm." And Dylan, eyes full, walked to the garden and read it aloud to the fig tree. Because some stories deserve to be spoken into the wind. Some love deserves to echo, even when no one is listening. And some endings aren't endings at all. Just a quiet, unwavering beginning, called forever. The next morning, mist settled gently over the garden. Dylan walked barefoot on the damp grass, a cup of coffee in hand, steam rising with the early light. He paused beside the fig tree, now taller than them both, and touched its trunk as if greeting an old friend. The bark was smooth in places, rough in others, just like the life they'd built. Behind him, the house stirred slowly, the scent of cinnamon drifting from the kitchen. And somewhere inside, Kayla was probably humming. He didn't need grandness to feel full. Just that sound of her voice, that light behind their curtains, the scribbles Mason left on the fridge, the pile of books on her side of the bed. Every corner of their home whispered, "We stayed." And staying had changed everything. Kayla stepped out with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She walked up behind him and leaned into his back, arms circling his waist. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The world was soft that morning, like it knew they had nothing left to prove. Only more to live Later that day, they visited the center for a storytelling afternoon. Kayla read a new short story, one. She had written about a garden, a storm, and a man who learned to grow things again. The kids listened, wide-eyed, especially Mason. When it ended, Dylan joined her at the front and said, "I lived this story, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure it keeps going." Kayla reached for his hand. The children clapped, not knowing they were witnessing love in its truest form. On the way home, they passed the old train station, the place where truths were first spoken. Kayla asked him to stop the car. They stood on the same platform, hands entwined, hearts steady. "No matter how far we go," she said, "this is where I found your voice." "And you," Dylan replied, "are where I found mine." They kissed there, again, but this time with the weight of forever behind it. Back at home, the wind picked up, rustling the wind chimes in the greenhouse. Dylan glanced at them and smiled. "I think your mom would have loved you," Kayla said. "I think she sent you," he answered. And in the quiet that followed, there was no more searching, no more waiting. Just presence, the kind that never leaves. Some stories end with goodbye. Theirs didn't. Theirs ended with still here, still showing up, still building, still saying yes, one morning at a time. And if you stood outside their house on a quiet day, you might hear it, the sound of love choosing to stay. Years later, no one remembered the headlines, but people remembered the fig tree, the way it grew beside the house, the way it stood through storms, the way it bore fruit, sweet, late, and exactly on time. They remembered the woman who taught through silence, and the man who learned that love doesn't demand to be loud. It asks to be consistent. In the greenhouse, there's still a bench, worn from use, covered in books. And if you sit there long enough, you might hear the echo of a promise that never needed to be spoken. We stayed. And in staying, we became. If this story moved you, if you believe that real love grows in quiet moments, if you know that the strongest hearts are the ones who choose to stay even when it's hard, leave a comment telling us. Have you ever chosen to stay when it would have been easier to walk away? Tell us what city you're watching from. We want to know where this story reached. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, share it with someone you care about. Like the video, subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the soul. And remember, sometimes love doesn't arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it whispers, "I'm still here, and I'm not leaving." **